A lone rider here. A little bit about my custom road bike. I actually have two. One was made for me by a friend of mine, and this one I made myself. It was actually the first time I ever picked up an oxyacetylene torch, and I think it came out well, all things considered. So you have a lugged steel frame, and there's a few interesting features on this that I included for, well, my own reasons. The general philosophy behind this was like racing bikes for the rest of us. I wanted a traditional road bike, but I wanted it to be a little more practical. And it's interesting that I actually came up with the idea of this prior to the new trend of any road or gravel road bikes. I'm not claiming to have invented that category, but it's worth noting that I deliberately had this created with a extended head tube lug, so the handlebars are slightly more comfortable height, and there's clearance for 32 millimeter tires. Traditional road tires are 23, so these are pretty big. And part of that was the rear stay setup. This has sort of a variation of fastback stays. Fastback stays, generally speaking, attached to the rear. But if you do that, you lose clearance because you're bringing this in and you're changing the angle. I wanted to maintain clearance for these wide tires, so what I actually did is I had them attached to the sides. Now to do that, I had to make an extension for this lug because you can't braze it directly to the tube down here. They're normally intended to be braced to the lug. If you braze it to the tube, it's not going to be strong enough. So I actually cut out a piece of tube and made sort of an extension for this lug and braced it on and then braced it to that. So it's double wall thickness here. As you see, it preserves the clearance for the wide tires. Now, not everything came out perfectly. The bike has 9-speed, but there's only 8 cogs. I have a spacer, and I locked out the spot where the smallest cog would be. The reason is when you typically make a frame like this, you make a cutout on the inside of the chainstay to allow for clearance of the cassette, and I didn't make the cutout big enough. So it worked fine, but whenever you took the wheel off, it would scrape the paint. So I just, since I wasn't going to use the littlest cog anyway, and since I grew up with 8-speed, and there's nothing wrong with 8-speed in my opinion, I just took the last cog off, replaced it with a spacer, and there you go. So, I mean, there are a handful of things I would probably do different if I was making this bike again now, but since I'd never made a bike before, and I'd never picked up a oxyacetylene torch before, I think I did pretty good. You'll notice it's got old school center pulls. These are, I don't know, one of the coolest parts of the bike in my opinion. And then nothing fancy as far as the rest of it goes. You've just got, I don't know, like Shimano Tiagra or something, and some nice wide bars. I'm actually not a fan of these ergonomic drops. I think they're ugly as sin, but they do have shallow drops, and they just happen to be the only bars I had lying around with shallow drops. So, you know, there we go. But that's the custom bike I made, and you'll see I did cutouts on all the lugs and filed them into like teardrop shapes. The exception is the cutout on the rear lug where I made a B for my name, which I thought was kind of cool. You know, all the rest, it was just like down here and then up here. Some of them are like sort of lost under the paint and the brazing. It's worth noting, like I said, I never brazed before, so there actually was a little bit of excess brass that I quite couldn't remove. You can see some of it there. So, you know, it's not the smoothest looking lug work ever, but I think I did pretty good. And in retrospect, actually, what would have been cool is to have all the cutouts go not only through the lugs, but through the underlying tubes. And so, like for this, for example, if it went all the way through and then you could actually see the seat tube protruding through, you know, in silver, that would be kind of neat. The seat post, rather, you know, protruding through there. If this was a clear through cutout, but I didn't think of that at the time. So, you know, a little something for the next one. But there you go. And then a little bit of a variation on compact gearing. Traditional compact gearing is 50 and then 34. But I kept the 50, but I put a 36 on the inside just to give it a little more oomph. And then the cranks are really, really old. These actually came off a they came off like a Trek 470 from like 1994 or 1995 or something. So kind of weird, but just a standard 105 derailleur. And, like I said, mishmash of other parts. I happened to find, I was at a local knife shop picking up a new Spyderco, and they had these case stickers for the Case Knife Company, and a lot of them just said Case Knives, but some of them just said Made in America and said nothing about the knife company. And so I grabbed a bunch of these that said Made in America, and I put one on the bike a friend of mine made, and I put one on this one, because the bikes are, of course, handmade in America, in this case, right here in the state of New Jersey. So I thought it was kind of cool to have that, and then a little bit of drillium on that front derailleur there, and then, of course, the Columbus sticker. The tubing on this is, in fact, Columbus, except for the top tube. I kind of messed up the mitering the ends of the tube, and it ended up too short, so I had to use other steel. He had some random tubes lying around, my friend at the shop, so I had to use another tube for the top tube. So the whole thing's Columbus except for the top tube, which I honestly don't know what that is. It might be Reynolds, might be like Dedekia or something. I'm not sure, but anyway, so that's the custom road bike, and I think it came out pretty cool, and I really enjoy riding it, and it's nice. I don't ride it much in the winter because of the salt. Salt does not agree with steel frames, but come spring, I'm going to be taking this out again, and I can't wait to do that. So, Lone Rider out. Rock on, stay safe, be cool.